Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about learning to check our ego and something I observe as a coach. Um, and I think a lot of this is, again, in part ego, and it's also in part the idea that certain, people over the years in the lifting community have tried to promote the idea that we have to push everything to the absolute limits all the time. And, when it comes to heavy lifting, I don't think this is necessarily a wise idea. I'm not saying on your curls or some lateral raises or calf raises that, training to failure, even on most of your sets, is a problem. I don't think that it is. In fact, I think it's a great way to get the most stimulus if you're trying to keep volumes a little more moderated. Totally valid. Totally valid. But when it comes to our big exercises, and I think this is really a problem, even for people in the pursuit of maximum strength, they get hung up with problems of understanding a training max. They get hung up with problems of understanding taking a set to, close to technical failure. Because we need to look at those things that way. Okay, a bench press or a squat should not be trained to muscle failure. They generally shouldn't be, okay, due to the nature of the exercises. And it's not necessary to do so. And what I mean is, for you to get to a 600-pound squat, it is not necessary for you to ever fail reps. It's not even necessary for you to ever have bad form on a squat to do that. It just isn't. Now, it's going to require years and years of blood, sweat, and tears and some pretty hard training and a lot of muscle. And some people will probably never have the genetics to get to a 600 squat, and that's okay. That's not the point. Point is, as a coach, I've observed that it's not necessary to do that. Okay, and when people do this, they don't always understand that when it comes to doing heavy singles, doing a true training max, meaning a lift that's about 90% of your all-out max of what you could do it, giving everything that you had, on competition type day. Right? Doing 90% of that with perfect form actually carries over to max strength extremely well. Okay, carries over extremely well. And again, what do I mean? If your projected max is 500 pounds, doing 450 for one rep has a training response. It will improve neural drive. It will improve your ability to produce force. And I want to be clear here, and guys will do this and they'll keep ramping, and I'll see guys do this all the time. They'll do a rep that really they should have stopped there. It was already a little heavier than a training max, and they're like, but it felt good. And I'm like, no, not really. It was pretty slow. And then they make another weight jump, and then they miss the lift. And the question I have for those people is, do you think that you got any benefit from doing that? Okay. Do you believe that you got any benefit from doing that? I don't think that you do. It's not necessary to learn to grind to have elite lifts. It's just not. I'm not saying in some cases it can't help some people when they need to. Certain lifts are more prone to benefit from grinding than others for a true max. But by and large, it's just simply not necessary. Plenty of guys walk into a platform and even break records with a beautiful weight, with a clean lift that is 30, 40, 50 pounds heavier than anything they've ever touched. Okay? And you see it pretty regularly. Right? It's not necessary. That 90% will do more than people seem to realize, and it won't beat you up and destroy you and hurt you the same way. Especially if you're going to do this for a long time. Right? And the issue is the recovery element. And that really is what it comes down to. You are digging a hole in your recovery. All right, it's the same thing when we're dealing with the big lifts. I'll see guys that want to do this for, a top set. You give them a weight, 350 pounds. And, tell them take it to one rep in reserve. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're looking for it to stop by technical failure. In other words, 1 rep in reserve means 1 rep in reserve with decent form. Okay? And a lot of times I'll prescribe people to do all their sets that way. Multiple across multiple sets. Well, you shouldn't have any grinding reps then. Because a grinding rep is 0 reps in reserve. If a rep slows down quite a bit, and you see even the most slight form degradation, that's a 0 rep in reserve. So what do I mean in that? Maybe you have a little more forward lean than normal on your squat, okay? Maybe you have a set amount of knee valgus and you have a lot more knee valgus on that rep and it grinds up slower. That could be it. Bench press, same thing. Maybe you have a rep that grinds a little and you flare much earlier in the lift. It goes up slow, has a different bar path. Okay, that's pretty much reaching technical failure. And we're already at the bleeding edge, right? We already have muscles that are reaching failure. You have certain muscles that are doing that, or else the form wouldn't change in that way. So you've already hit the limit in your weak link. That's the point where you rack the weight. Okay? You rack the weight at that point. And if you're going to do more sets, you definitely don't want to do another rep if you're going to try to do more sets. In fact, I would say once you see that happen on 1 set, you probably took that set too far. So if you're trying to do 3, 4 sets, whatever, and you do that on the first or the second set, I personally think that that's a mistake already. But you'll give these things to lifters, and then they'll try, and then they'll either grind through a terrible rep or miss a lift. And the thing I always ask, do you think you really got a benefit from that? Do you think there is a true, legitimate training response from that? I don't think that there is. That's the sort of stuff you should be saving for the smaller stuff at the end, right? If you're trying to reach that level of muscle failure, you don't do that on your big lifts, okay? You do that on a leg extension. You do that on a reverse hyper. You do that on a leg curl. You do that on a bicep curl, okay? That's where that sort of stuff should be, because on those, the form doesn't degrade the same. Meaning usually those movements, there's not as much technique going on. There's not as much structural support through the body, okay? Bar paths are not as critical. You're not compromising anything. You're not compromising anything. Going to that point should be safe for those sort of movements that it's perfectly safe to do so. Right? You're probably not going to get hurt doing a bicep curl with a dumbbell to failure like that, because the form won't degrade the same. The muscle just gives out and the lift stops. So unless you cheat the weight up, form can't really degrade. We're not at the same risk of injury here. And we're not beating you up for no benefit, because that's the other thing too. Those sort of really grinding, messed up reps, we're not getting a great training response from those anymore.